Did you know that you could be in your early 40s, not meet any of the usual risk factors, have a stroke, and then go on about your life for months without even knowing you had one? I did not know that myself until I followed up with my neurologist after I got out of the hospital. I'm going to get more into that in a minute and give you some details there. But basically, I'm just going to be kind of catching you up on everything that's happened since I was discharged, because it's been a lot. I've got lots of appointments, lots of testing, lots of answers, and some more questions. So basically, I'm going to let you know what I know, what I don't know, including my list of diagnoses that I currently have confirmed, and then kind of like what's next on the horizon. So let's get right into that, shall we? By the way, if you're new here, I'm Heather. This is my channel, Heather's Hikes and AdVANtures. Typically, I post content about car camping, solo travel, places to visit, hidden gems, campground reviews, all things van life, tips, must-have, things of that nature. However, if you are no stranger to the channel, you'll know it's been a little less adventure and a little more searching for answers lately. Many of you know that I have been struggling with some chronic health issues that have been getting progressively worse as the year goes on. Speaking of which, disclaimer, I do apologize in advance for my voice. I know some of you are not fans to begin with, and it has taken me forever to film this video because the last couple of weeks I have been on the struggle bus and the voice has been cooperating even less. So I'm pushing through here because I do want to update you guys and stop leaving you hanging. And then I also want to get back to my normal type of content for a while. So let's get right into basically everything that's happened since I was discharged from the hospital a few Fridays ago. While I was in the hospital, they did do a repeat MRI of my brain and my neck just to see if there had been any significant changes following my episode. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I am going to link that video below. I had a terrifying ordeal when I was driving by myself on the highway where I basically, what they called it was a temporary partial paralysis event. My legs and arms just kind of quit working and I had no control over them anymore. So I'm not going to get back into that again. That's going to be in the video linked below. But while I was in there, they did want to do a repeat of the MRIs that I had had a couple months prior, just to make sure that there were no significant changes showing in my brain or no new lesions in my neck, etc. And once they confirmed that there was nothing emergent, I was eventually discharged after being in there for 3 days. Silly me, I thought that meant that my MRI was basically unremarkable, but it just meant that it was not anything that had to be handled before I left the hospital. Because when I followed up, they did tell me follow up with my primary care, my neurologist, and my cardiologist, ASAP. My cardiologist's office idea of ASAP was a month after I got out, so I actually have not been to that one yet. So fingers crossed that at least my heart is still the same level of dysfunction that it was before. And I did, however, follow up that following Monday, made my calls, and then that Tuesday, I went to see my primary care based on what happened to me in the hospital, all of my symptoms, and the fact that the cardiologist had already previously confirmed my arrhythmia and my tachycardia issues, which is super fast heart rate for no reason. She felt comfortable moving forward with a presumptive diagnosis of POTS. I am going to put what that stands for here below. Typically, the average time it takes to be diagnosed with POTS is up to 8 years because it is still such a relatively unknown disorder compared to a lot of more common, more well-known ones. The best way I can sum it up, and again, I am no doctor, I am no expert, I'm just kind of regurgitating what I've been told as I understand it in super simple, super concise terms. But basically, It has to do with how my blood flows and my heart rate. The T in POTS stands for tachycardia, S syndrome. The P is for postural. Again, don't remember the O, that's why I put it below. But basically it means when I change my posture. So when I go from laying down to sitting up to standing, my heart increases way more than it should because my blood doesn't circulate through the way it should. Instead, it pools in places, and then it tricks my heart and my brain into thinking that I'm not getting the oxygen in the blood that I need to it. Overreacts, you can pass out, you get real lightheaded, your heart starts beating super fast, yada yada. So that was one new diagnosis I was given based on that. And interestingly enough, Mayo Clinic does have an entire unit devoted to POTS. They have a POTS clinic that's supposed to be like leading, cutting edge, the best of the best in the country. So that may be on the horizon in the future. They did say that they would refer me there, but let's keep it moving. That next day, which was Wednesday, I had my follow-up with my neurologist. And that, my friends, is when I was told that the MRI showed clearer what my prior MRI only hinted at, apparently. And that was that there was an area of damage in my cerebellum. That was evidence of a cerebellar stroke. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Can you repeat that? When was I supposed to have had this stroke? And basically all she could tell me is that the way they kind of date them is either like new, like a new event that's fresh, they can tell it just happened, or if it's something that's old, which is in my case what it was, which basically is anything over 3 months ago. So in my mind, retrospectively, I'm thinking that back in March, when I had my very first ocular migraine that I spoke to you guys about, I'll link that video below too. I'm kind of second guessing that now and wondering if maybe that was the stroke, because when I saw the eye doctor that morning after to let her know what had happened, I thought I was going blind. I lost my vision for 20 minutes, thought I was going to pass out, had to lay down, everything was spinning. Felt hungover afterwards, all this stuff. And the first thing she asked me was, and you haven't had a stroke, right? Or you don't think there's any chance you had a stroke? And I'm like, no. Like, why would she even ask me that? Don't you think I would have gone to the hospital? So now I'm kind of thinking in retrospect that perhaps that might have been, because after that is when all of my other neurological issues kind of ramped up. My issues with balance, motor skills, short-term memory got worse, a bunch of stuff. But anywho, apparently you can get a stroke from chronic migraines, which I did not know. And I know I've mentioned before that my MRI of the brain did show some white spots and lesions that were not classic textbook MS indicators. It was kind of in an area of the brain where you wouldn't expect to see them for MS. And apparently those white spots could be caused by chronic migraines, but they still can't rule out MS, which is why I had my lumbar puncture the next appointment that week. Let me tell you, you never look forward to finding out you're going to have a needle jabbed in your spine. Actually, I misspoke. My lumbar puncture was the Friday after the hospital. Thursday, I went and had another dozen vials of blood drawn. I swear at this point, I just feel like a human pincushion to test for a bunch of other stuff again. And then the lumbar puncture came that Friday, because Friday, way to end the week with a party, right? Well, it actually went very smoothly, and when I got those results back, those actually did find something. It came back as abnormal, positive for 2 additional bands. I am not even going to attempt to pronounce the name of those bands. If I remember while I'm editing it, I will put it here. But it's the only bands that they test for in your spinal fluid. And apparently, if you have excess bands that don't correspond to your blood, that's considered, if you have 2 or more, a presumptive positive. And apparently 95% of all MS patients have at least 2 extra bands. So we're back to kind of leaning towards possible MS again, right? Well, I don't know. Let's move on to the following week, and then we'll kind of circle back to that part. So then the following week, I had an appointment that was already scheduled to follow up with my endocrinologist. That was part of the lab work that I had had the week prior. And surprise, surprise, my TSH is way out of whack again. So that makes the 3rd time after leveling out that it's done that. And I've been completely compliant with taking my replacement. I make sure that I leave plenty of time before I eat or drink or take any other medications. I've been following it to the T. So I do think that whatever's going on in my body that's fighting itself is also attacking what thinks is my thyroid, even though it's not there anymore. So I think in my non-expert brain, based on what I've been told and what I've learned so far about my other conditions that I haven't gotten to yet, I just think that it's fighting and attacking what it thinks is where my thyroid is, and that it's causing the TSH to spike and release more, and that's not helping me feel better either, because basically I have what's diagnosed as functional hypothyroidism, and even though I don't have a thyroid, my body's responding as if I was hypothyroid at the moment. So again, that itself can lead to fatigue, hair loss, achiness, a lot of things that I already deal with. So it's just kind of piling on top of what already made me feel bad. So we are following up with that again. If it's still out of whack, we're going to do yet another adjustment. We're also going to do an ultrasound just to make sure, because for the first time ever, my tumor marker came back as borderline positive. It's not a level where they're worried about it yet, but they do want to keep an eye on it. Every time before, it's been like less than 0.01, so it's been basically 0. And this time it was higher. So those 2 coupled together don't make me feel warm and fuzzy, but my endocrinologist assures me it's nothing to be worried or concerned about at this point in time. The day after my endocrinology appointment, I went back to neurology again to have my EMG, which is where they jab needles all up and down your legs and make you like move your muscles and stuff. And then it tests if your muscles themselves are getting weaker. So like if the muscle's getting eaten or atrophying or breaking down, it tests for that. And based on that test, it's not my muscles themselves that are getting weaker, which means he said it is a central nervous system issue versus an actual muscular or nerve issue. And therefore, it's not necessarily neurological, because it is my brain's signals are misfiring. So they did go ahead, because of the stroke, and order an additional test called an MRA, which is like an MRI, but it looks at the arteries, just to kind of make sure there were no blockages, obstructions, blood clots, anything that might hint at another stroke. And that turned out good. Came back as normal, nothing concerning. So that is a good thing. That means most likely the prior stroke was caused by migraines. My neurologist has started me on a daily preventative that is supposed to greatly reduce the number of migraines I get from even happening. And then if and when I do get a migraine, I have another prescription specifically designed for those types of migraines that is supposed to knock it out right away. So far, it does seem to be helping a little bit. I've had fewer. I've gone from every single day to like 4, maybe 5 times a week. 4 times a week, probably. But the medication to counter it does seem to be pretty effective. Of course, I don't want to have to take that on a regular basis. So hopefully it continues to work and I continue to have less migraines and can eventually hopefully get off of that. But that is another one of my issues is I do have chronic migraines both with and without aura, which basically just means some of them are regular run-of-the-mill normal migraines, and others mess with my vision and cause my vision to get all wonky, like the ocular migraines that I get. And then the following week, my mom drove me up to Mayo again for round 2. And before I get into those visits, let me show you a little bit about what Mayo looks like, because let me tell you, it's on a whole nother level of hospital. It's beautiful. Everybody there is like next level helpful, nice, just so kind. And I mean, aside from it not meeting what my initial expectations were, which was due to miscommunication and not their facility, I have been so impressed with my experience there so far. Just everybody has been wonderful. But I'm going to stop rambling and show you around Mayo Clinic a little bit. Not too shabby, huh? So that was the Davis building. Apparently they have a main building, a Davis building, and then another building that I keep wanting to call the Manchurian one, but that's not what it's really called, so don't listen to me. But that's what it is in my head that I remember it as. So anyways, that first day when I went back up to Mayo, I met with the gastroenterology group there for all of my multiple GI issues, which I am not going to detail here because TMI and it won't really do any good anyways. So I talked to them about that, and she ordered a bunch of tests, including a colonoscopy and endoscopy with biopsies, which you would think would be the one that I was looking forward to the least. That's actually the one that bothers me the least. I am not looking forward to the other 2 tests. One of them is going to test my swallow function. That's what she said. But apparently that one and then the esophageal manometry are no walk in the park. And since it already always feels like somebody's squeezing my neck or that I'm wearing a really tight turtleneck on a good day, and since I already have issues with swallowing and feeling like I'm choking all the time, I am not at all looking forward to those tests. So if you have had them, please don't say anything that's going to freak me out even more in the comments below. I'm kind of trying to take the less I know, the better approach to those two tests for the moment, because I don't want to stress. So yeah, anywho, those are going to be coming up next month. And in addition to that, I'm actually going to be seeing a speech and language therapist to discuss the fact that I do have the paralyzed vocal cord. My voice has drastically changed, and I guess see if there's anything we can do about that. I don't know. More on that to come later. So if you're one of my voice haters, good luck. You might be getting a slightly more pleasant change. Who knows? Maybe you'll hate my real voice or my old voice even more. But anywho, moving on. Later that day, after I met with the gastroenterology group, I went over to pulmonology and had a lung function test. None of us were really anticipating there to be any issues with my lungs, but just because of the fact that I am so out of breath all the time, they did want to rule that out just to make sure. So I am happy to report that while I did not like that test at all, I did very well on it. No issues there, no concerns. Everything is working great with those. So knock on wood, really the only two things I've got going for me are my blood pressure and my lung function at the moment. By the way, if you ever do need a lung function test, real quick summary, because I had no clue what to expect, and I didn't really find much good information on YouTube. So basically you go what is into, kind of looks like a little sound booth that you would go into to get your hearing tested. You sit in there, and then there's like a little inhaler machine thingy hooked to one side, and you basically have to blow in and out, breathe regular, hold your breath, blow out like you're blowing up a balloon, yada, yada, all these different types of breath exercises. And then at some points they cut off your air and see how it responds when you still try to do that. Not like, your air, but like, you get it. So anyways, I did not like that because I get out of breath so easily anyway, but I did do well on it. So there's that. But I just kind of wanted to give you an idea if you ever do have to get one of those, so you kind of know what to expect. It was pretty quick. I would say maybe like 20 minutes at the most. And the lady was really nice and very easy. I know, and then at one point you have to go up and down some steps for a few minutes, and then they check your breathing again. But that was it. So after a full day at Mayo for day one, we actually double-checked while we were there to see if they had any neuroconsult openings like we were told to do, and they did actually have one for the following morning. So my mom and I got a hotel right next to Mayo Clinic, and here's a quick little tour of the hotel room. All right, these are the luxury accommodations for the night. We've got a microwave and coffee maker that we're not going to be using. Got the last room. There were none available, but we begged and pleaded, and they found one for us. You can see we're living it up big time, ready for bed, and it is 7:38 p.m. Not a bad little room though. And if you look out here, excuse the air conditioner, Mayo Clinic is that building right across the parking lot. So a very short drive in the morning. And then it was day two, where I met with the neurologist in a different building. Check this one out. Okay, I had to come and sit in here for a little bit because I miss it so much. Don't worry, I'm just in the driveway. I'm not going anywhere. But let's talk about day two now, because the only thing I did that day was meet with the neurology team there, discuss everything, and they really kind of helped me shed some light on the whole stroke aspect, and it really kind of clicked for me how each of the things that I'm having the most issues with, like with my fine motor skills, my short-term memory, How I'll just be like, you know, walking, carrying my cup, and then all of a sudden my hand will just kind of flop and then I'll spill, things like that. And like my balance issues and all of that kind of stuff pretty much is activities that the cerebellum do. So the fact that that part is the part that's damaged, it kind of makes sense why I'm having those issues now. So that was kind of an interesting thing for me to learn, because nobody had taken the time to explain any of that to me. And actually, that's one of the things that I appreciate most about Mayo so far. Every single one of the doctors has gone out of their way to explain everything, why they're doing what they're doing, why they think what they think, kind of go through the process to make sure you understand, really take your time if you have questions. And a lot of you know, that's not the typical doctor's appointment these days. It's more like, how fast can I get you in and out so that I can get you billed and on to the next patient? So it's really kind of a nice, refreshing change. But it also makes me upset over the fact that if all appointments were like that, I feel like we would need so much less of them than we do. But that's a topic for another day, for another video. I spoke with that neurologist about my lumbar puncture findings as well, and they explained that, well, 2 is the threshold for a positive when it comes to MS at a lot of places, since Mayo Clinic has a much higher threshold for a lot of their things, because they really, really want to make sure that they are diagnosing you correctly so that you don't end up needing diagnosed again later, and to avoid being misdiagnosed and having to go through ineffective or potentially harming treatments if you end up with something different than what you're diagnosed with. So their threshold is actually 4 instead of 2. So by their standards, mine is not quite yet a presumptive positive anyways. And so what they recommend is that 6 months from my last MRI, or sooner if something drastically changes, that they do a repeat MRI with one of their super high resolution, state-of-the-art, back to the future MRI machines that apparently can see like even all the little veins and the connections, and it sounds super high-tech. But she said that they would have ordered that now, but since I just recently had the MRI, they don't want to do another one so soon. They want to give at least a few months of a kind of window in there so that they can actually get some good comparison over a period of time to see if there's any changes. Of course, if there are, that would indicate either new damage from something else, or depending on what it is, if it's additional lesions, things like that, that would indicate that MS is probably likely. So I basically left there having a bunch of GI testing scheduled for next month, and just having to kind of wait until it's time to get a new MRI, barring any new changes, or knock on wood, any new events that happen that are different or considerably worse than what I'm already experiencing. So let's move on to the following week now that we've left Mayo. That following Monday, I had my first consultation with the hematologist/oncologist at the Cancer Institute, and I really, really liked that doctor. He seems very thorough, very reasonable, he reminded me a lot of the doctors that I saw at Mayo. Very good at explaining patients, that kind of thing. And he ordered a bunch of new tests. Basically, they want to make sure from a blood standpoint that I'm not having any clotting or issues that I shouldn't be, anything that would put me at higher risk of like an embolism or a stroke or something like that, and to rule out some of the preliminary or most common blood disorders. So I do have a follow-up with them coming up soon that I have not done yet. That will be on the horizon soon, next week actually, to go over the results of those labs and kind of discuss possibilities going forward. So TBD more on that. We'll see if there is anything significant. I'll probably just do like a little post or something. Again, I'm not going to do another one of these big videos anytime soon unless something earth-shattering happens, which I don't really want anything earth-shattering unless it's good. You know what I mean? So then the next day, Tuesday, I had my MRA, the thing that I told you guys about that is like an MRI, but it looks at your arteries. So I had that done of the brain and the neck. And I had those requested without contrast because of the negative experiences I had had on the prior couple of MRIs. So I got that ordered with no contrast. Easy peasy, went into it thinking nothing. Everybody said, oh, it's basically exactly like an MRI, like you can hardly tell the difference. The difference is just in what they're looking at. So it did. It looked exactly like the MRI tube, and for all I know, maybe it is the exact same machine even. I don't know. But got in like normal. For those of you that don't know, my last MRI while I was in the hospital, I projectile vomited while in the tube, all over myself essentially. So this time, I was not nauseous and I was not nervous. And then about halfway through, my arms and legs started to go completely dead and numb again. Same thing with my head. Started seeing stars. Everything started spinning. My muscles started twitching. So when he finished the neck and was getting ready to move on to the brain, or maybe when he finished the brain and was getting ready to move on to the neck, either way, he came in to tell me, and I said, can I have a quick break? I'm not doing really well right now. I think I just need a moment to kind of catch my breath and relax, because the sound was just... And he was like, nope, sorry, gotta keep going. Don't have time to stop. So he proceeded. And then I had almost... It was basically an episode almost exactly like what happened to me while I was driving. That put me in the hospital. I thought I was going to pass out in the MRI tube. When he rolled me out, thankfully it was like with like 5 to 10 minutes left that I got really bad. So by the time he rolled me out, everything was still spinning. I had to lay there for like a good 10 minutes before I was even able to sit up with help. And then it was like another 10 minutes before I could stand. And I have basically felt horrible ever since that day. So I think that was another episode, as the doctors are calling it at the moment, that was triggered by the machine. From what I know now, one of my diagnoses that I was given by Rheumatology, confirmed by Neurology at Mayo, and then now by their pain management or pain medicine department, is called central sensitization syndrome. And I'm going to explain a little bit more about that later, but now that I do know more about it, I think that it's the MRI itself that triggered both of those really horrible experiences, because apparently loud sounds, flashing lights are really bad triggers, and both of those were at play when I was already feeling awful. And I was laying flat, which I typically don't do right now because of my GI issues and my neck issues. So I think it was just kind of like I got triple whammied, and my body was just like, nope, I'm shutting down. But that is basically, we are now up to speed. Again, I do still have to see my cardiologist, and I am going back to talk to the hematologist, oncologist, but we're pretty much up to current day now. And let me just kind of quickly run through. I'm just going to list the actual diagnoses. I do want to say, I know I'm under no obligation to share this information. I know even more so that there are those of you that think it's an overshare to begin with, and that I shouldn't be sharing this information, and that it should be private and kept to myself and just be between me and my doctor and my family. But I do have several reasons for being as transparent as I have been on this journey. First off, just to get right out of the way, in keeping with transparency, is purely for selfish reasons. I want to have this documented, especially with my current short-term memory loss. I want to have a documentation, a timeline of this kind of whole ordeal, because I am still refusing to give up on the fact that one day I will be able to look back on this when I am feeling much better and much stronger, and I am back to sharing my hikes and my adventures with you all instead of talking about this. And I'll be able to look back on these and really see how far I've come. And just to have it documented, since I haven't been doing a great job with my journaling every day, this is a way for me to record what's happening. My other main motivation from the very beginning has been to share this journey with my viewers, because it's become very apparent that, unfortunately, a lot of people out there can relate. They've had similar struggles with chronic illness, autoimmune conditions, having to go through this long process of searching for a diagnosis and trying to find treatment, and just really dealing with constant, pain and just symptoms all the time. And I feel like maybe if me sharing my story, kind of explaining some of the tests I've had, kind of documenting the process, what's worked for me, kind of my failures and what I've learned that should be prevented in the future, that might save other people more time and energy and effort. Whatever the case may be, I feel that if even one person watching these videos can benefit from my story and have kind of a less overwhelming and less stressful and less upsetting of an ordeal in trying to get to a healthy place again, that it's totally worth it for me to put that out there and keep it public for everybody. I know that I'm opening myself up to unsolicited advice, to unsolicited opinions. I know that the stigma with a lot of chronic illnesses and with these long drawn out processes is, a lot of people tend to think, oh, she looks fine, she looks young and healthy, she's smiling and laughing, there's nothing wrong with her, she's just faking, she's milking it, she just doesn't want to work anymore. All of those types of stigmas. And in all honesty, that's been my biggest hurdle to overcome, is my negative self-talk. When I am having a struggle getting up off of my bed to do something, even something as simple as starting the load of laundry, it's like I catch myself saying, Heather, stop being lazy. And it's not laziness. I literally feel too awful to do it. I'm too weak. I feel like I might throw up. I feel like I might. So I'm resting. I'm not being lazy. I'm trying to conserve what energy I have and prioritize accordingly. And so that's been a big struggle for me. And I think maybe me sharing everything that I'm going through might help others to not be so hard on themselves. At least that's my hope. But enough about that. I am just going to, like I said, list my diagnoses, and then I'm not going to go into them because I've already kind of explained enough. And I just, people have asked what I have, if I do know anything, if I've been diagnosed with anything at all yet. So now you'll know. Here we go. In addition to the functional hypothyroidism and vitamin D deficiency, I have also been diagnosed with diastolic dysfunction of my heart. I have tachycardia and arrhythmias, and they don't believe that it is a result of heart disease or caused by the heart itself, but more so a response of the heart's responding to my body attacking it all the time. So that covers one system. I know I've also talked about it on here before, but I do have lichen planus, which is a rash kind of similar to psoriasis or eczema, and it gets itchy. It can flare up in times of stress or with environmental factors. It's mainly contained to my feet now with treatment, so that's mostly under control. And then more recently, I was diagnosed with alopecia areata. So as you guys may be more familiar with that one, you might know that it's kind of results in hair loss and patches. The chronic migraines with and without aura, which may or may not have been the cause of my cerebellar stroke, which leads us into that cerebellum that does have that damage from a likely stroke at some point earlier in the year. And in addition to that area on the cerebellum, there are those white spots or lesions that they want to continue to monitor and continue to do what they call serial MRIs over the course of months to evaluate for changes. because that, coupled with my borderline positive lumbar puncture findings, may be enough to confirm MS at that point. So that is still something that is high on the list of possibilities, but that is currently in the category of unknowns right now. I know I already mentioned POTS, but just to reiterate, since I'm listing everything, I have now been diagnosed with POTS, which a lot of times does end up accompanying other autoimmune or neurological conditions. So again, all of this stuff is kind of playing off of each other right now. I was also diagnosed with fibromyalgia from my original rheumatologist, and the rheumatology team at Mayo Clinic does agree that I do have fibromyalgia, in addition to that other diagnosis they gave me of central sensitization syndrome. And it appears, and both my neurologist and my pain medicine doctor there both agree right now that that's kind of the main culprit at the moment that's making everything worse than it needs to be and kind of playing everything off of itself. That is something that I knew relatively zero about until all of this. And to be honest, when the rheumatology group first gave me that diagnosis, I just kind of added it to the list and thought, okay, it's another thing. But now that they've explained it more in detail to me, it was kind of like a light bulb went off. Like, okay, yeah, this is definitely what's been going on in my body. And it kind of made me understand why certain things have gotten worse, why I've had certain reactions the way I have to certain stimuli, why the heat seems to impact me so dramatically like that, and just so on and so forth. Now, again, not a doctor, not an expert. So what I am going to do is I'm going to link a video below from Mayo Clinic directly. So from the experts, if anybody wants to know what central sensitization syndrome is from somebody that can explain it very well and can explain the impacts of it, I highly, 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 highly recommend you watch this video. I am not benefiting in any way from recommending it, but I truly think that for a lot of people that have struggled with chronic illness, with autoimmune conditions, with trying to figure out what's wrong with them, when you know there is something, but the tests just aren't confirming it for you and you're getting frustrated, please, please, please watch this, because it's still such a relatively new and unknown diagnosis by so many doctors. Even my local neurologist told me when I went in to follow up that he really is not knowledgeable enough on the subject to even know how it plays into anything. So he's kind of deferred me to Mayo from now on. But I really, really think it answers. It's basically like if your body is a light switch and it turns on when it needs to activate and turns off when it needs to deactivate. For instance, that whole fight or flight thing. When you're in danger, you react, you run, you escape. You know, that adrenaline starts pumping. When you're no longer in danger, the adrenaline goes down, you calm down, you regulate. Basically, if you have central sensitization syndrome, your entire central nervous system is not able to regulate any of the senses. Sounds, sights, like that's why flashing and bright lights and super loud sounds can be such a trigger. Basically, everything, you're on stimulus overload 24/7, your nerves, everything. We're using the light switch analogy. Basically, my body is jammed in the on position at all times. It is not able to turn off at the moment. So that's why I have, no matter how exhausted I am, why I have such a hard time staying asleep. It's why I'll just be sitting there doing nothing and all of a sudden my heart rate just spikes for no reason. I get out of breath. It's why when I get tired or when I start having my other symptoms, my arms and legs have started shutting down on me when it gets too bad, because my body thinks that it's in crisis mode and it needs to shut down everything that's not essential to survival. You know, just, again, If this sounds at all interesting to you, watch this video from this expert because it's so fascinating. And even if you're not impacted, if you know somebody that is, it might make you understand a little bit more of like, oh. So yeah, watch it. And that actually brings us finally to the end of the list. The very last, most recent thing I've been diagnosed with just as of this week after having my DEXA scan is I also apparently have osteopenia, which is the beginning stages of osteoporosis. Again, not something you would typically expect somebody in their early 40s to be diagnosed with, but here we are. So when I follow up with my endocrinologist to recheck my TSH, my tumor marker, get the ultrasound, all that stuff, we are also going to be discussing what to do about that. Most likely I'm going to have to go on at least estrogen or some type of hormone to try and stop and counteract it, and some type of calcium supplement. So I want to find out what the best calcium supplement for me to take is that's going to be absorbed well. They seem to think I'm having some absorption issues in general when it comes to things like that, which may explain why all of a sudden my TSH is wonky and a lot of other things. So I just want to kind of make sure I'm doing everything that I need to do and not taking anything supplement or medication wise that might cause other issues. And so that kind of brings us to what's next. And then I'm done talking. I was actually accepted into a program at Mayo Clinic that is what sounds to be very intensive. It's a 3-week program, like basically a full-time job, Monday through Friday from like 8 to 4, and you are just there for 3 weeks, and it kind of takes like a whole body, multi-pronged approach. It incorporates kind of your diet, any lifestyle changes, anything you need to eliminate that you're eating, or maybe things you need to add. It looks at all of your medications and tries to see which ones we can ultimately try to eliminate and, find other ways to control things. It also uses physical therapy, occupational therapy, behavioral therapy, medicine, of course, if and when needed. And I mentioned physical therapy already, but also like coping techniques and mechanisms that can help kind of counter certain symptoms and help you manage them better. So I really think it sounds very promising because basically with the central sensitization syndrome, every time I have an episode or a flare or a spike in my symptoms and issues, or anytime something new or worse happens, basically what it's doing based on the nature of that syndrome is that when I'm crashing from that episode, it's kind of deconditioning all of my muscles and my brain signals to where it's kind of getting them confused, to where basically my muscles are starting to forget how to respond to things appropriately. And that's why it kind of feels like I'm walking around on somebody else's legs, or that I have like Forrest Gump's leg braces on, and why I feel so disjointed and disconnected from my body. So I've definitely learned a lot, and it's kind of made me understand what's been happening to my body all year. And this program that I've been accepted into, I spoke with the director. I had a virtual visit with him last week, and I actually feel optimistic for the first time because somebody in that position at that level at such a reputable clinic, that's one of the most renowned places in the country to go for care, I don't feel that they would oversell a therapy or a treatment if they weren't pretty confident that it would help. I feel if anything, they would kind of undersell it, to kind of set expectations so you're not like going in thinking, I'm going to come out perfect, if they don't really think it's going to do much. And after speaking with me and reviewing all my records, it really, really seems promising. He feels that by the end of the 3 weeks that I would have a noticeably significant reduction in the severity of a lot of my symptoms, and get a better handle on how to manage it going forward on my own, and that it would be not insignificant. So to go from having been all year with virtually no hope to leave every appointment more frustrated than I started, to feel like there's nothing that's ever going to make me feel like myself again, to having this doctor say with confidence that he really, really feels that this is going to be at least a big answer, if not the answer to help, at least a big part of the solution until they are able to confirm if I have MS or narrow down and figure out what else here is at play. So even if they never do, even if it takes another couple years to confirm what my main condition is, I'll still have equal benefit from doing this program without knowing. And it will help me manage it on my own going forward. They also coordinate all the specialties together so that nothing is slipping through the cracks, and that we're being proactive and making sure that we're not missing things or doing something in this specialty that might impact this issue, and kind of help me coordinate and to make sure that I'm getting the best care. So definitely ending this video on a positive note. I am officially scheduled. I am on the books to start this training program. It's not going to be for a while still, so it's not going to be like tomorrow, but that means hopefully by the end of this year I can be back out hiking and adventuring and sharing happier, fun adventure content again. So stay tuned.